Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Songs of Our Lives. I'm Brad Rose. I'm an artist, composer, a writer, the founder of Foxy Digitalis, and somebody who thinks about sound far more than is healthy. Each week, I invite on a guest, and we talk about the music and the songs that have meant a lot to them and been with them along or throughout their life. I think that's a better way to say it. Previous guests include Miriam Gendron, Shane Parrish, Claire Rousset, Rosalie, Andrew Peckler, Leah Bertucci, Lawrence English, Mizu, Matt Sage. The list goes on. But this week, I invite on Tashi Wada. This was a really exciting episode for me. I'm not only a big admirer of Tashi's work, his solo work. He runs the SALTERN imprint, which is fucking amazing. His dad, Yoshi Wada, is one of the all-timers, and it's a concoction of wonderful things that have been important and meant a lot to me in my life, and it all kind of came together in an hour where we talk about all of that and a whole lot more. His new album, What Is Strange, is out now on Revenge International, and it's a hell of a record for one, but it feels so vulnerable and so personal that it kind of influenced the way we approach this episode. So it's like most episodes in a lot of ways, but it's a lot more focused on, I don't know, like the songs that we picked that we talked about, because we didn't get through the whole questionnaire. It would have been way too long because the conversations got pretty involved, but we really focused on talking about how I think a lot of what we talked about feeds into how this album ended up being what it is. Because this album feels like this, I don't want to say it's like his life's work or anything, but it's this really beautiful, like, coalescence of all these important events and experiences, emotions and memories throughout his life, and especially through a recent period, and it all comes together in this wonderful sonic expression. And so I really wanted to get at that through these songs, through memories, with his dad, with his partner, growing up, and coming into his own as a composer, and all of those things. And we got to do that through a bunch of songs. So I think it's a pretty special episode. The album's wonderful. If you haven't heard it, please go check it out. We recorded this a little while ago, and it took us a while to get it set up. Lots of hits and misses, but we finally got it done, and it was so worth all the effort. I hope you all enjoy it. My guest today is a musician, a composer. He runs the incredible SALTERN label and so many more things. It's Tashi Wada. Woo! Welcome. How's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, obviously, What Is Not Strange it's been out for what, a week, 2 weeks, a week. How's it feel?
2 weeks. Yeah.
2 weeks.
Good. Yeah. It's great when something you've been working on for so long is finally out of your hands.
Yeah.
It's a nice feeling. You're sort of relieved of responsibility in a certain way.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious too, this record is, like, obviously, like, all music is very personal and all that, but this record is like it feels like such a vulnerable record to me. Has that made it feel different to sort of share that? I mean, people really like there's so much of yourself in this record, like your whole life. It feels like that it's, yeah, I don't know. I'm just wondering if that feels different than like previous stuff in any way.
Yeah. That feels true. I think, I mean, I've been making music for a long time now, and not necessarily releasing a ton of music, but I mean, as a musician and like my relationship to the world, I am also like seeking new experiences for my end,
Mm-hmm.
and this feels that way. It's yeah, it feels like I don't know. I think at the end of the day, you want to feel kind of like you did everything you could,
Mm-hmm.
and um, I feel like I feel satisfied in that way with this album. I feel like I really put in a lot to it, put a lot into it, and I feel like it, yeah, it does feel like I've kind of like shown a lot with it, and that is, yeah, I feel like I feel good about that also, just in the sense that I also want that from other people. You know,
Yeah.
I want people to like feel good about like showing different sides of themselves. I want that. Like, I want to see like the complexity of people, and maybe not necessarily just what you think you want people to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's yeah, that resonates a lot with me. Thinking about, I mean, those are the ways that like connections are built. I mean, how everything is built like those moments of showing sides of yourself that you may sometimes a little scary, and but it's like reaching out and then somebody reaching back kind of thing. And I think you gotta, like, as an artist, like I think about this all the time with my music. It's like I need to be willing to reach out, and if I want people to reach back.
Yeah, and it's a process. I feel like that evolves as you continue to make work and put it out into the world, and um, there's a dialogue between things you've done in the past, and yeah, I feel like I yeah, I mean, just that's speaking about like myself and my relationship with musical world and friends and family,
Right.
but also, yeah, musically I wanted to kind of just see how far I could push certain things, and in that I guess maybe the catch is that, well, maybe it goes too far for certain people, in certain directions. I don't know. I mean, but
Mm-hmm.
you kind of can't worry too much about those things, and
For sure.
yeah, the best thing, I mean, that you can do is like be yourself, and this is definitely feels like a pretty kind of broad reflection of myself in a certain way.
I'm curious. So I think the description, and you mentioned this, like, I mean, you've been working on this for what, like 5 years? Is that roughly the time frame?
Yeah, like, I mean, from the very, very earliest, like, um, ideas and
Mm-hmm.
messing around. Yeah, I feel like it was a long process, and maybe longer than I expected. I mean, definitely, I would say longer than I expected, but uh, in the end, these things are not necessarily for the best, but they become part of it.
Yeah.
Like when you sit on something for a little while longer, then I mean, there's always a danger of kind of overworking things, but yeah, I'm at this point now, I'm like happy that you know all of this time passed and all this life events, and
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I was wondering, with it, like you said, like the earliest sort of ideas being 5 or so years old, and a lot has happened in those 5 years. How, so like, I guess to go back, like when those first ideas were like, were you like, okay, I have this idea for a record, or was it just like, I have these ideas and I'm going to start, working on stuff, and then it takes on a life of its own, or like, oh yeah, like how did that kind of process go?
Yeah, I think I mean, I wanted to make, I think, okay, one distinction I feel like for this album and maybe the last one that I made with my dad is that I wanted to kind of approach it more in like a studio setting rather than necessarily capturing live performances, which is maybe more kind of
Right.
how I had been approaching things previously. So that was one like initial part of the process. But then also like I um, I felt like I had just kind of all of this material that I had been accumulating over time, and it was this intricate process of putting it all together. How does this all go together? I think that's maybe,
Yeah.
and it kind of, that's maybe very much what it's about. It's like this sort of shifting state, and maybe things that you wouldn't think go together, or maybe you still don't think. I don't know. But yeah, it was very like gratifying to put all of these things together rather than like maybe more compartmentalize different
Right.
sides of things I do.
Yeah. Is so obviously many, but two like very major life events happened in this time period with your father passing, your daughter being born. I know it like is making art, making music, has that been a sort of space for you, like to kind of process and understand like those all the emotions that go along with it? Like, because for me, it's very much it's like my safe space. It's like my, for lack of a better phrase, like the place where I can start to make sense of things, um, to some degree. I'm just curious, like if there's a role in that for you. Like, I mean, obviously those are parts of this record. So, um, yeah, I don't know if I have an exact question, but like I'm just kind of curious how creating thing like and making music and art and stuff has been part of that process for you to kind of get your head around these huge things.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I would say that like those two changes in my life, they happened not. Um, I was already working on the record when that
Right.
um, when those things happened, and yeah, I mean it maybe like it's interesting to me because these I mean, I guess people like to have a narrative attached to music. You know,
Absolutely.
it's something concrete to talk about that um, gives, I don't know, some color
Yeah.
to the story, and I it's these are one side of what was going on in my life, has been going on in my life. And I'm honestly, I'm very happy to like I'm not trying to hide these things. And maybe sometimes it's interesting in the context of like non pop, whatever you want to call it, music, where that's so dominant to have a little bit of information about the artists and what's going on with them. I mean, coming from a artistic family, it's kind of always tied in for me, whether I like it or not.
Sure.
So, but I do feel like also maybe from like my dad and the world he came from artistically, in New York and the 60s and 70s, where there was this kind of blurring of life and art and how you were living, and that it feels somewhat natural to me to sort of have this fluid relationship, that it's like what I'm doing in music is not this isolated thing that can't be in dialogue with what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I recorded one of these a couple months ago with Miriam Gendron, and we were talking about how, like, when we were kids, like, we didn't have, like, I didn't have a lot of that space to, like, express emotions and feel I mean, it was whatever, but in music class, singing, it was okay. And so, like, for me, it's like music has always kind of become, like, there's that connection from that. And so I don't know if that has to do with anything. It just popped into my head. But I think that's interesting. Like, yeah, and we'll get into your dad here in a minute, just with the first question. But before we go into any of that, I did also want to ask about the people who played on the record, and we'll talk about Julia later with one of the questions, so we can. But like Ezra and Dev and Corey, if you wanted to, it's an amazing lineup.
Yeah, they are all amazing, and they all do so many things, their own music, and are involved in so many cool things. So, but that, yeah, I mean, having a group like that, and including Chris Cohen, who recorded, and Stefan Mathieu, who mixed and mastered the record, like all these people, it's like a total dream for me to work with everyone, and they're friends, and in some cases I haven't worked with them in this kind of context where we're playing my own music, or but yeah, it's, I mean, it's it's kind of at the heart of making music for me, is these friendships and relationships, and I don't always want to just be hearing my own voice. So, I mean, so it's and I would say like a lot of the the arrangements of the music and how it was put together was explicitly with these people in mind, and how what they do, keeping that in mind, and how they would respond in recording, and so it's very much a dialogue in that way. Like if it were different musicians, it would be probably sound differently. Not just, it's not just. I mean, I do write parts for people to play when it's more appropriate, but in some cases, the point is to kind of let them run wild and do their thing. And they're all so sensitive, and as musicians, and so that they can find a way to sort of sit in with it, and also help push it further.
Yeah. Whenever because you just had your album release show a week or so ago, like when you're doing these live, is it the same? Is it Dev, Corey? Is it the same people playing?
Yeah, not always, but
Mm-hmm.
yes. I mean, the idea is to have the same musicians. There's different concerns and
Sure.
scheduling things that kind of make things possible or not possible. But yeah, that's definitely it. I kind of can't really imagine putting the music in other people's hands. The live thing is also it because some aspects of the music are more improvised that it changes. And this is actually maybe the first real um, record that I've made where um, we didn't. I never performed any of the music live. Most of it live uh, before.
Oh wow.
So in that case, when we were putting together the the show a couple weeks ago, it was interesting for me to approach it that way and to kind of like navigate like, oh, okay, so how does this music function live, which is often like quite different for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like how do you, in some cases you want to replicate things, and in some cases that it's just more about the energy or
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
How have the shows gone?
It was just one show. We have more.
Okay.
We'll be playing in the fall and
Okay.
touring, and but it was crazy. I mean, it was one of these experiences where I kind of I don't know if I can remember a lot of details because it was so like intense, doing like physically and mentally, like trying to keep everything like moving for the first time. So, but it was fun. I mean, it was great. I, I love playing live, and I have not been playing live as much for a while, so it's great to be back feeling useful again.
That's awesome. Well, I look forward to fall tour. Or I don't know if the fall tour dates are out. I don't know, but I'm maybe it'll be
yeah, and there are more. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I'll find myself in one of the cities where you're playing. But
I hope so.
who knows? Okay. Well, we'll continue talking about this as we go through this, but we're going to get into the format a little bit here.
Sure.
And so the first question, as always, is what's the first song that you remember?
So yeah, my thought on this, it's interesting to think about, like, I do like think about like musical memory in general, like, and how things change over time. And I mean, my first reaction is my dad's music, Tashi Wada. It's not really a song or anything like that, but it's just the going to see him live. And it was very intense because he was often playing bagpipes, so it was very loud. And when you're a child, you're kind of sensitive to things that are extreme like that. But that's like my memory of that is. I mean, I'm sure I heard like recordings too, but the live experience is very visceral, and it was like this interesting experience of like my dad is my dad, like kind of superimposed with this person in front of people, performing, and clearly in like a different state than when he was, when we were at home. And my dad was kind of like, he's a very serious performer and maybe kind of like formal. So yeah, so he would become very intense. But then there was also like there were the sides where he was more involved in like Fluxus type performances, which were um, much more like open-ended and like in terms of like the interaction with the audience. And um, uh, yeah. Then the other thing that came to mind for me, or comes to mind for me, is like uh, and it's actually, it's like, it's kind of one of these funny memories where we have there's a home video, but in my school in New York, um, we had this really great music teacher named Ramy, and we would do these like Beatles medleys, and, and all the parents were there, and, but they were like really great. And there's a video of them, and they're just like, they're so sweet. All these kids singing Beatles songs, um, and yeah, it was only like way later that I like kind of made this connection with like the Beatles, like to my dad through Yoko Ono and John Lennon. It was like there was like a bleed there,
Right.
And my dad knew Yoko in Japan before he moved over, so it was like this interesting kind of melding of worlds. But I didn't like, it wasn't something that I don't think my dad ever mentioned at that time. But yeah,
So my daughter is 11. Well, she'll turn 11 on Monday. But I think it was either last year or 2 years ago. We went to her music class, had a music program. It was exactly that. Like they were singing a medley of Beatles songs, and with like some choreography and props, and it was pretty fantastic. I have to say, I was eating it up.
yeah.
Um, I'm curious, like when like when you like obviously started doing your own music and doing your own thing, was was your dad like supportive, excited about was because I mean I have friends who their parents were like artists and stuff, and they knew how hard it was, and so when their kids did the same thing, they were like, oh, so I always wonder what that's like.
Um, yeah. I think there was, there was a bit of a, my dad was always like very, uh, generous with like sharing things with me. And, it was kind of like a way of relating like interesting music and art. And my parents would take me to, you know, exhibits and, um, concerts and things like that. But, when I was, yeah, there was a period when I was a teenager, like late teens, where I was like, you know, trying to figure out what who I was and what I was, what direction I was going, and it wasn't like a clear path. There were a lot of different veering directions. But when I was living back in New York after having been in California for high school, and I started going to a lot of shows, and like certain things were kind of like accumulating for me. I think I kind of already knew like music would be involved in some way, but I didn't know like what I would be doing. And uh, when told, I think I remember even like just telling my dad over the phone or something that I wanted to, or maybe in person, but I wanted to like pursue more music. And there was a bit of like a hesitation, like, are you sure you're ready for that? Like, it's like, and I totally understand. It's like I think about this now, having a child, like it's like just like it always probably seems like whatever, um, like supportive structure and community that you had maybe is sort of dissolving, like,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember my dad saying, it's like, it's not like when I was young, and like could, rent a place for really cheap, and I like cheap and easy part-time jobs. It's like so much harder now. So I think he was just kind of warning me, but then eventually, and this was the case with my mom too. She was a little like, "Are you sure? Like, are you really?"
Yeah.
And a little tough love. But they once it was, I think it was just me showing that I was like serious about it, and they kind of came around and have been very supportive.
Yeah.
Since. And yeah, I mean, it's of course I'm sure it also for my dad was like, we worked together a lot, and so we had this like this relationship like as adults, like as me as an adult, like where we like did things together, traveled together, performed together, and which was always very special for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think about that. Like I said, my kid's is 11, and she's just starting to learn to play the cello, and
oh, cool.
It was, I've tried very hard not to push her in those directions. So when she kind of came to it on her own, yeah, it's like I think about that too. Like even, I mean, I'm 45, so even 20 years ago, it felt so much easier.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, what's it going to be like in 10 years when she's 20?
Yeah.
And
it felt easier 5 years ago.
Well, that's yeah. But at the same time, it's like I think about how, like you were saying, your parents took you to like all like to shows and to see like exhibitions and stuff, and like I do that. We do that with my kid, with our daughter, and it's like, of course, she's like showing now. When she's starting to find her own interest, she's finding interests that it's like, oh yeah, this is what you've been exposed to, I guess.
Yeah.
Is that something? I mean, your daughter's much younger, but are those things you already like think about?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, Julia and I, we talked about like, well, wouldn't that be like cool if she was a musician? But it's like once you have a child, you also like realize they're very much their own person, and you're not going to be like, I mean, you don't want to be pushing them to be someone they're not. Like
exactly,
that won't work out for anybody. So, so yeah, you definitely have to let them,
yeah. It's a hell of a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And now like she's come to a couple of my shows now, and like you were talking about like the difference between like your dad at home and then like performing. I mean, it's it's two very different things. And after the first time, she was like, after she saw me play, when like we were still at the venue, I could tell she was just like, this is weird. I don't know, like it's the same person, but it didn't seem like the same person. And how do like you could see like the wheels spinning in her head, like how do I reconcile this? And yeah, but
yeah, totally. Yeah, they start to see you as more as like a person, right?
Yeah, it's weird. And then like for me, the coolest that I did this thing at one of the big museum here in town last year, and like a place that we'd taken her many times. And so the fact I had a thing there, she was like telling all her friends, and I was like, man, this is the best. I feel like one of the best feelings ever as a parent is that my kid thinks I'm cool. Oh, yeah. So anyway, okay, well, we've totally got off the tangents here, so I'm gonna jump ahead because I just want to talk about this song. What's a song that puts you in a better mood?
One that I've come back to is Sportsman by Hosono. And I wouldn't say that I listened to that song that much. I do listen to his music quite a bit, maybe less recently, but in general. But yeah, that one I feel like it's every time I've played it for anybody, everyone wants to like write it down if they don't know already. And I was actually just like looking up the lyrics, and the lyrics are so great too. I hadn't really like focused on them. It's not something I tend to really. I usually just kind of let myself absorb them. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but the lyrics are also so great because they're just like kind of self-denigrating and about like being weak, and it just somehow the combination with the music is so great. It just like um, uh, yeah, I think most people would agree that that's a very kind of like uh, uplifting song in a kind of tender way, sort of a little bittersweet, but just very kind of cheerful. As music, a lot of music of that era is.
Yeah. Yeah. This is what I hadn't thought about this song in a little bit, but as soon as I put it on, I was like, oh yeah, I don't know how you can hear this and not just instantly kind of just feel better. Because it's just so great.
Yeah, it's like it's very wistful, and also I think just like thinking about Hosono and his approach to things, his career also makes me like feel like it's one of those people you're like, oh, he just like really did what he wanted to do. I mean, he had whatever resources, but just like his music has just like so many different like branches to it.
Mm-hmm.
From like more pop stuff to more like atmospheric to soundtracks, just kind of like really like kind of ideal to me. Just how he seemingly just made the music he wanted, and it's, yeah,
Yeah, and it seems it's like he could do anything. I mean,
yeah,
it's amazing that when somebody can do all of these different things as well as he did it too. I mean, it's just yeah, it's
yeah, yeah, and I think that's like relating to like what we were talking initially. It's like I love that he like seemingly was, I don't know, it feels like he took a lot of risks in his music. Like,
mm-hmm.
like is anybody gonna like this weird song I made? Or like I mean, he obviously has a lot of adoring fans, but just but yeah, I appreciate that the 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 push to kind of like try new things. I feel like that's something for me that's like become important.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I love having like completely different experiences and being in unusual settings, or it keeps it very like alive for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a big thing that has it's become really important to me, and like not to get like the older I get, but I mean it's true. It's like I'm yeah, and someone like Hosono where I don't know. I mean, not that like I'm known for whatever, but it's like people know you for one thing, and then like I'm going to do this totally other thing. Is I think that's awesome, just because it's like I'm going to do this totally other thing that no one is going to expect me to do just because I want to do it, and that's yeah, that's like that's the way to be.
Yeah, it doesn't like necessarily always like work in one's favor, because people like to kind of have
Yeah.
like a specific like uh they like you to have a specific thing that you do that they can
Mm-hmm.
associate you with. But I feel like Hosono is like a good example of like it is like the whole picture
Yeah.
that that's so interesting.
Yeah. And with him too, even like all the different things I've, and maybe this is just because I've listened to a lot of his stuff, but it's like there are these like connective tendril, like it's like, oh, I can tell, like this is, it's like, yeah, this is not, I don't know, his some sound, like this is a soundtrack that's like, really atmospheric or whatever, and then this is his pop stuff, but there are like things that it's like, oh yeah, it's still Hosono, but
Mm-hmm.
um, but that's a really hard thing to do too.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, okay, this is another one I want to talk. I'm basically just picking out the songs I want to talk about, asking
Great.
the question. But I'd love to answer this question. So it's a song that people hate, whoever these people are, but you don't care and you love it anyway. Because I'm with you. I love this like unabashedly. So
Yeah. This one, it was actually a question that I was like kind of, so I was like, what what do people hate? Because I feel like with the internet, you can find people who like everything.
Right.
But in my world, people, I feel like, really dismiss Lamont Young's forever bad blues bands. And I understand. I'm not like, it's not like I'm like, how could you dismiss this? Like, it's not for some people.
Yeah.
But, and I think maybe even myself, like being, people who are, enamored with the more well-known works. I revisit this because I was presenting like I was presenting the music of Lamont in the context of tuning, and I was trying to uh, I was like, I hadn't listened to this in a while, and then I actually I heard there was a live recording that was sort of uploaded to YouTube, which was cool to hear because it actually I think for most people it actually make more sense as a live situation, but I think this is another case a little like what we were just talking about with Hosono, is that I think something that I really appreciate about this project is that it's like reaching in a completely different direction. I mean, we all associate Lamont Young with the sustained, pure kind of singing,
well-tuned piano.
This
is like as far away from that.
Yeah, and this is like, some people would be like, oh, this isn't kind of bad taste, and of course, like certain, like things like certain kinds of drumming can trigger people, because they get associated with certain styles of music. But I really appreciate that, that he went in this direction for whatever. I don't know the full story behind it, or what maybe he was trying to connect to his, I don't know, his certain aspects of his past, his upbringing, and I don't know, Velvet Underground or things like this, and this was his sort of take. But I think it's I really appreciate that he did this, whether or not even if you think it works or not.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's that was. I remember first hearing it and being just totally confused at first, because again, I knew the sustained tone, just intonation stuff, and it was wait, this is and it didn't make sense to me. But the fact that it didn't make sense to me at first is what kept me going back to it, and I was like, I want to understand this or just know more about this. And I love that. I like we've been talking about, I really love and have so much respect for when people just decide, I'm going to do this thing. I want to do this thing that's not anything in the realm of what I'm known for, and I'm going to do it because I want to do it, and I don't really care what.
Yeah. I mean, for me, another aspect which I was thinking about recently is I wrote this essay on tuning for The Wire, and I was, I was trying to present my take on tuning, and because I don't really, I do some things in just intonation, but it's not exclusively just intonation, and for me, it's been, I have been looking for it, the ways people have approached tuning that don't fall into that very specific genre we often associate with just intonation, and it's not always easy to reconcile the things, because music that's in alternative tunings, there's certain, basic things like sustained sustained tones are useful because they allow you to tune in time. But I've been interested in looking at examples of music in different tuning systems that that sort of try to circumvent that a bit, and not just feel like you kind of land in this particular genre of music. Because I don't think it's not a genre. I mean, we know that from the world that, there's different tuning systems used all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
But in like a contemporary setting, that it doesn't have to be tied to like one style of music.
Yeah.
That's interesting for me. And I think like this rock band that Lamont had was, maybe it was part of that. That maybe that was like the idea that he was like, I've been doing these sine tone and singing or, piano, retuned piano pieces for a long time. And I want to like see how this can function in a different setting.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and there's something like about, I don't know, that just is kind of fun about that. Like, let's like especially taking something that, because I think a lot of people would think of it as like serious or, academic or whatever. It's like, okay, let's take one of those ideas, and turn it into a fucking rock band. Like, that's, I think those are like beyond just the scope of, Lamont and this specific thing. I think that's like just a really interesting, like you were saying, like a really interesting thing to think about and find. And it's always exciting when you find examples of that. Like you hear something where it's like, oh, this is, it's this tuning system or it's this idea that I'm used to in this one, but they're totally turning it in a way that I never could imagine. Like that's exciting stuff.
Yeah, and it won't all work, but I like the attempt, whether or not, I think that's like I think that's important that that we step outside of, these maybe aesthetic safe spaces sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think about just a lot of stuff I've been doing the last few years. The stuff that doesn't work, I tend to learn way more from and figure out. Like, it's like, okay, this was a disaster, but I can kind of see why, and now I can take this, what I've learned for the next approach to something, and it's, I don't know, like failing at something is terrifying and super exciting at the same time.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay. We're going to jump ahead we're going to talk about your favorite lyrics because this is like my gateway to talk about. Well, what are your favorite lyrics?
As I think, as I mentioned a little earlier, I actually don't really listen to lyrics in a conscious way. I think I just kind of take them as part of the music, and I don't think I have a particular type of lyric that I prefer. But anyway, so my one thing I have noticed is that I play in my partner Julia's band, and since we tour and we play the same songs every night, I end up tuning into the lyrics more, and whether or not it's because I'm so familiar with the song, or I'm actually looking for a cue in the lyrics. But I do love Julia's lyrics. She has a very particular approach. It's a bit kind of, I think, sort of surrealist, I would say. I'm not sure if that's the word she would use, but there's like a sort of collage or different things at play. And it's also very much about the sound of the words. That's a big thing for her. And she's talked about like how there's this reconciling of the meaning of the word, but also the sound of the word, and the words, and how this kind of overlaps. And the song that I was thinking of is "Feel You," which is from a while back, but it's also from that song is from. It's kind of around the time when we like got together, and so it like has like this kind of importance to me in like my life, and I've played this song a lot, and it's I think the lyrics are kind of sort of a little bit like how would I say, they're a bit sentimental and like, but in a way that I feel like is um, um, very effective, and there's certain like turns of phrases that I really like.
Yeah. I'm curious, like how I wanted to talk a little bit like making like music and art like with your partner and how, because like, so my wife she's an archaeologist, but she used to be a big part of all this stuff. And then she kind of was like, no, I want to be an archaeologist and I'm going to go do that. But we had like a band together and we wrote a bunch of music together and did a lot
Oh,
of
cool.
stuff together. And we still like, we have different creative projects still. And I don't know, I feel like it's enriched it's the way that, like, I can't, like, I don't know. It's such a cool thing. Like, for lack of a better word, to be able to do that, like, create things like that with your partner, and so I'm like, obviously with your record and her record coming out close together, and all, connections, like you said, you guys play on each other's records, and I'm just curious like how that sort of enriches your life and like and yeah.
um yeah, well, I guess it's I mean, it's interesting right now having our respective albums coming out around the same time. It was at some point it like became clear that was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And um, yeah, I mean, initially we were like, oh, that's going to be a little bit chaotic, but also it's good in the sense that like we're kind of in the same headspace. Now we're both like more focused on touring and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, it's all happened very organically. I mean, in the same way that like working with my dad was not like something that like felt like forced in any way.
Yeah.
And we've kind of, with Julia and me, we've kind of allowed it to um, happen without a lot of planning, I would say. Like, I mean, one distinct thing I would say thus far is that we tend to each have our own projects, and and the other person is involved. We haven't really had sort of so-called like a band where we're like,
Right.
we're both in the same role or equal roles. And I think that's something that's been like maybe one of the things that's revealed itself to me is that like works well for us.
Yeah.
Is that we're like, one is sort of leading and the other is in a supportive role. And yeah, it's I mean, of course, just on like a practical level, it's very useful to have people like a partner who understands what you do and like what the different the lifestyle is like, and when things are tricky, or kind of touring is like, it's a
oh man,
it's a thing that's like hard to understand unless you're like kind of doing it or have done it. So yeah, I think it's it's very beautiful for me, of course.
Yeah, of course.
And it's a very like we get to travel together, and we had a lot of shared interests in music before, but of course I've learned a lot from Julia over the years, like playing with her, recording with her, and just being around her. And so yeah, it's very very much a part of it now.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I just, whenever we, like I said, it's been a while since we've really made any music together just because of career changes and stuff. But it's just like a cool thing to be like, yeah, we're making a thing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. All right. Well, we're going to do the last two questions just because these are the sort of the big questions that always end the show. So the first question is, what's the song that means the most to you? And not necessarily because of the song itself, but because what you associate it with.
This is one that it's maybe I wouldn't say I listen to this all that often anymore, but Morton Feldman's Piano and String Quartet, which is one of his late, long uh, form pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And this, I'm kind of partial to a particular recording, which is, I mean, the most available recording by Kronos Quartet and Aki Takahashi. And it's a sort of particular recording that the string players are playing with vibrato. And, so it's like some people don't like it, but it's the one I heard first. And my dad he gave me this CD, and I was maybe like, I think I was in high school, maybe end of high school or something. And at some point a little bit later, I was listening to it, and it was, before that it was unfamiliar to me, but and maybe it was, would have been around like in the late 90s or early 2000s. No, yeah, like late 90s. It's like a lot of these, there's so many recordings of Morton Feldman now because, different interpretations
Right.
And I think also maybe for my dad, this was interesting because it was a lot of the late pieces that are long had not been recorded. Because, they didn't really work for LPs. I mean, maybe, yeah, probably still don't. But yeah, around that time, I also found a book of, maybe it may have like been republished at that time, of Feldman's writings. Give my regards to 8th Street. I think, yeah, and I'm not sure exactly when that reprint came out, but it was Exact Change. And reading his writings and Feldman's writings and becoming familiar with his music and absorbed was like a real like turning point for me. Just something about, like, I don't think I'd ever experienced that kind of like way of talking about music. And yeah, it just like so many things kind of, I feel like, hinged on that for me. And then like becoming familiar with a lot of music of that era, but different eras, like particularly I would say like music of like the American experimental tradition. And somehow that connection with the writing and like it's his connection with the art world and so forth was just like, it kind of really drew me in. And yeah, it was just a CD that my dad handed me. And yeah, it's still very nostalgic for me to hear that recording.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, well, the last question, of course, at least in this moment in time, what's your favorite song or piece of music, or however you want to define it?
This is one I've first I was gonna say Malkans, which is a raga, and it's sort of attached to a recording. It's actually 2 live recordings of Pandit Pran Nath, the Indian classical music singer. My dad studied with him. Lamont was deeply tied to him, and which I grew up listening to recordings of him, so it's like very ingrained in me, his voice. but these particular recordings are just, I think they're probably not too hard to find online. They're just like, he's at, like, his voice is at such an amazing state. It's so gravelly and so rich.
Yeah.
And that raga or song is like particularly interesting to me. And whenever I see another musician performing or interpreting it, I always like immediately go for that. It's like supposedly, I mean, it's a beautiful mode, but it also, like, it's considered a raga that's supposed to be performed at night. And it's supposedly has like kind of like dark mystical powers.
Ooh.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure if that's like that's the way they would describe it, but it has like a kind of mystery around it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've listened to those recordings with Pandit Pran Nath so many times. They're like, it's great because they're two different live recordings and they're slightly different, but like initially I preferred one and then eventually I gravitated towards the other. Yeah, it's very I don't know, profound music.
Yeah, it's incredible. I know the versions you're talking. I know the ones you're talking about, and it's profound is that's like the perfect word for it, because it is. It just, there's like such a gravity to it.
Yeah, and just the grain of his voice, it's like so amazing in those recordings. It's like I'm not sure exactly what year they're from. I can't remember, but just like, yeah, it kind of comes out of the dark. It's like,
yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, that is a perfect place to end. That's I appreciate you doing this so much. I'm glad we finally got to make it happen.
Oh yeah, thank you so much. And it was very fun. It was fun to think about all these songs, because I mean, it's like coming from where I am as a musician, like songs has like a specific meaning, but you know, it's
right.
Like, it's obviously yeah.
And I'll just remind everybody that What Is Not Strange is out now on Revenge International, and you're going to be going on tour in the fall. And yeah.
Yes.
Once again, thank you to Tashi Wada. I put in his playlist, so as always, his playlist follows picks, link in the show notes. He had picked stuff for some of the other questions we didn't get to, so everything that he picked, other than of course, the extended conversation questions that are in the Patreon section of these episodes, all of them are in the playlist. So there'll be some stuff on there you'll be like, oh, you didn't talk about that. Why is that on there? That's just because, he picked them, and you can kind of guess what question they correspond with because it's the same order as always. But I just wanted to put them all in there. He took the time to pick them, and there's some damn fine songs in there. So, What Is Not Strange, out now on Revenge International. I highly, highly recommend it. I also highly, highly recommend, if you enjoy this show and you've been listening to it, you listen to a couple, you listen to a lot of them, you listen to all of them, it'd be really incredible if you could leave a rating and a review, even if the review is just like, this rules, awesome, or fuck you, even. That works. We live in a fucking world of algorithms, and that sort of thing will maybe help it get in front of more people, and more people will get to hear cool conversations like the one I just had with Tashi, right? And if you extra love the show, you can join the Patreon, patreon.com/Foxy Digitalis for as little as $3 a month. The ongoing support is super meaningful, super helpful, and you get the episodes a week early, and they're longer. And in the Patreon section, we really let our hair down. So just something to think about. But hey, if that's not for you, take a few bucks, add a few more to it, pick up a copy of What Is Not Strange. And until next time, keep on listening to whatever the hell you want.